Feel the heavy titanium pulse of a story that beats with the rhythm of raw ambition and unbreakable resolve. We bring you the most intense cinematic experiences where the human heart meets the cold precision of destiny. Subscribe today and keep your finger on the pulse of greatness with us.
My son died 3 years ago. Or at least, that's what I was told. Every month since then, I drove to the Western Union on Route 9, stood in that same line, and sent $1,000 to my daughter-in-law for my grandson. Every single month, without missing one. I never asked for a thank you. I never expected one. My grandson was 8 years old, and he had already lost his father. The least I could do was make sure he didn't lose anything else. I'm 68 years old. I retired from the county road department 2 years before my son passed, before I thought he passed, and my pension isn't much. $1,300 a month, plus a little I pull from Social Security. I gave away most of what I had left over after my own bills. I told myself it was what any father would do. I told myself my late wife would have done the same thing. Her name was Margaret. She passed 4 years before my son did, from a stroke that came out of nowhere on a Tuesday morning in October. She was in the kitchen making oatmeal and then she was gone. I kept her photograph on the mantel and I talked to her sometimes, late at night when the house got too quiet. I told her I was doing my best. I told her I was taking care of the family. I believed that right up until the day my old Army friend called me from a parking lot in Tucson and said 4 words that turned everything I knew upside down. "Where are you watching from right now?" I'd love to know, because what happened to me is the kind of thing that people say only happens in movies. I used to think that too. His name is Carl. We served together back in the late 70s, lost touch for years, and found each other again at a reunion about a decade ago. He retired to Arizona after his second wife passed. Said the dry heat was good for his knees. We talked on the phone every few weeks, mostly about baseball and the sorry state of things in general. He wasn't the kind of man who called with gossip or drama, so when his name showed up on my screen on a Thursday afternoon in March, I answered with a smile, thinking he wanted to complain about the Diamondbacks. He didn't sound like himself from the first word. He told me he had just come out of a hardware store on the east side of Tucson. He said he was loading bags of mulch into his truck when he noticed a couple walking through the parking lot about 30 feet away. He said the man had a particular way of walking, a slight roll in the left shoulder, the kind of thing you notice when you've known someone for years. He said he stood there with a bag of mulch in his hands and stared, because the man looked exactly like my son. I didn't say anything. I felt the blood drain out of my face. Carl said he followed them at a distance, not close enough to be seen. He said the man put his arm around the woman, and they got into a blue pickup truck with an Arizona plate. He said he had taken a photograph with his phone. His hands were shaking when he took it, he said. He wasn't sure if he should send it to me. He had sat in his truck for 20 minutes trying to decide. "Send it," I said. He did. I stared at that photograph for a long time. The resolution wasn't perfect. The man had a beard he hadn't had before, and his hair was cut differently, shorter on the sides. But the shoulder, the way he tilted just slightly to the left when he walked, a habit from an old baseball injury at 17 that never fully healed. I had watched that walk for 40 years. I knew my son's walk the way I knew my own name. The woman in the photograph was my daughter-in-law. My son was declared dead after a construction accident at a site in Phoenix 27 months earlier. He was working as a site supervisor. The report said a scaffolding collapse. The body was badly damaged. Those were the words in the official paperwork, and the identification was made through dental records. There was a closed casket funeral. My daughter-in-law received a life insurance payout of $240,000. I had not asked many questions at the time. I was grieving. My daughter-in-law was grieving, or appeared to be. My grandson was 7 years old and could barely speak above a whisper for 3 months afterward. I had focused on getting through each day and sending that $1,000 and believing I was doing what Margaret would have wanted. $1,000 a month for 27 months. $27,000. Every cent of it taken from a man who was eating canned soup 4 nights a week to make the budget work. My son was alive in Tucson. My daughter-in-law was with him, and neither one of them had said a word to me. I want to ask you something, and I'd like you to think about it seriously. If you found out the person you had been sacrificing for had been lying to you the entire time, would you confront them immediately? Or would you wait and make sure you had everything you needed first? I had to make that choice in the span of about 10 minutes, sitting in my living room with my phone in my hand and Carl still on the line. I waited. Something in me said to wait. I called my daughter-in-law that same evening. I did what I always did. I asked about my grandson, asked how school was going, made small talk about the weather. She sounded the way she always sounded, a little tired, a little distracted, grateful enough but not overly warm. She mentioned that my grandson had a cold and that she'd had to keep him home from school. She mentioned that the water heater had been acting up and she might need to replace it. She did not mention anything about her husband being alive. I told her I hoped my grandson felt better soon. I told her I'd get the money to her by the end of the week. She said she appreciated it. After I hung up, I sat with Margaret's photograph for a long time. I had a cousin named Dennis who ran a small private investigations office about 40 miles from where I lived. He mostly did insurance work, background checks, that sort of thing. I had never needed him before. I called him the next morning. I sent him Carl's photograph. I told him everything. Dennis didn't express a lot of surprise. He said he had seen situations like this before, not often, but enough to know what to look for. He said he would make some calls. He said I should not contact my daughter-in-law again until he had more information. He said I absolutely should not confront my son directly. He said, and I remember his exact words, "People in situations like this have usually been planning their exit for a long time. You startle them, they disappear." I asked him what he thought was happening. He said it looked like insurance fraud, at the very minimum. I didn't sleep well for the next week. I kept going over everything in my head. Every visit, every phone call, every time my daughter-in-law had looked me in the eye and let me believe my son was in the ground. I thought about my grandson. I thought about what he knew, what he had been told, whether a 9-year-old boy had been carrying around a secret that no child should have to carry. Dennis called me back 8 days later. He had found them. They were living in a rental house in a suburb east of Tucson, both of them, along with my grandson. My daughter-in-law had told me they were still in Phoenix. She had given me a Phoenix address for the Western Union transfers. She had been lying about that too. Dennis had driven by the rental house. He said it was a nice neighborhood, well-kept yards, a 2-car garage. He said the blue pickup Carl had seen was in the driveway. He said he had also found something else. My son had applied for a passport under a variation of his middle name, supported by documents that appeared to have been altered. Dennis said this was the kind of thing that suggested a longer plan. He said my daughter-in-law had been making wire transfers to an account in another country, not large amounts, a few thousand at a time, spread out over the past 2 years. He said it added up to roughly $60,000 between the insurance money and what she had been saving. He said my $1,000 a month had been going into that account. I had to set the phone down for a minute. I looked out the window at the front yard, at the oak tree I had planted the year my son was born. He had climbed that tree more times than I could count. I had a photograph somewhere of him up in that tree, at maybe 10 years old, grinning down at the camera like he owned the world. I thought about Margaret. I thought about how she would have felt, knowing this. I thought about my grandson, in that rental house in Tucson, going to a school where none of the other kids knew his name had once been different. Dennis said I had a decision to make. He said I could walk away, stop the transfers, and let whatever was going to happen happen. Or I could take what he had gathered to law enforcement and let the process work. He said the evidence of insurance fraud was strong. He said the altered passport documents were a federal matter. He said if I went this route, there was a chance things got complicated for my grandson in the short term, and I needed to be prepared for that. I asked him what he would do. He said he wasn't the one who had sent $27,000 to a dead man. I called a lawyer the next day. She was a woman in her 50s who specialized in family law, but had handled fraud cases before. She listened to everything I said without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "The grandson. How old is he?" "9," I said. She said that would be the center of everything. She said if charges were filed and both parents were taken into custody, there would need to be someone in place to care for the child immediately. She asked if I was prepared to do that. I said I had been prepared to do it for 27 months. I just hadn't been given the chance. She helped me file a report with the FBI field office that covered financial crimes. The insurance fraud element brought in the company that had issued the life insurance policy, and they had investigators of their own, who moved quickly once they understood the scope of it. I gave them everything Dennis had compiled. I gave them the Western Union receipts. I gave them the phone records of every conversation I'd had with my daughter-in-law in the past 2 years, which I had started saving after Carl's call. The investigators asked me to do one more thing before they moved forward. They asked me to make one final transfer, the regular amount, to confirm the account was still active and still receiving funds. I drove to the Western Union on Route 9 one last time. I stood in that same line. I sent $1,000. 3 days later, I got a phone call from one of the federal investigators. He told me they had executed warrants at the rental house in Tucson that morning. He told me they had taken both of them into custody without incident. He said my daughter-in-law had not resisted. He said my son had been sitting at the kitchen table when they came through the door, and the first thing he had said, the very first words out of his mouth was, "Where's my boy?" I didn't say anything to that. I just kept listening. He told me my grandson was safe. He told me a child welfare officer was with him. He said the boy was a little shaken but physically fine. He asked if I could make arrangements to travel to Tucson. I had a bag packed before we even got off the phone. The drive was 2 days. I could have flown, but I needed the time. I needed to sit with everything, mile by mile. Let the desert open up around me the way it does when you get west of El Paso. All that flat space and sky. I talked to Margaret the whole way. I don't know if that sounds strange to you. It probably does. But she had been my partner for 31 years, and I was not in the habit of making decisions without her, even now. I asked her if she thought I should be angry at our son. I think the answer she would have given me is the same one I had already arrived at on my own. That anger is a fire that burns the person holding it more than the one it's aimed at. That what happened, happened. That the question now was what came next. I met my grandson in a county building in Tucson on a Wednesday afternoon. He had grown since the last time I had seen him in person, almost a year earlier. He was taller, and his face had gotten a little older in the way children's faces do when they have been carrying something heavy. He looked at me from across the waiting room, and then he came across the room fast, like he was afraid I might not stay. He didn't say anything. He just held on. I held on too. I found out some of what had happened in the days that followed, through the lawyer and through the child welfare officer and, eventually, through a letter my son sent me from county lockup. He wrote it by hand on 3 pages of lined paper. I am not going to repeat everything in it. Some of it is between the two of us. But the short version is this. He had gotten into debt 3 years ago, more than he could climb out of, and he had convinced himself that disappearing was the only way to protect his family. He said my daughter-in-law had been against the plan at first, but eventually went along with it. He said they had been fighting for most of the past year, that she had been talking about leaving on her own and taking the money with her. He said he had not known what to do. He said he thought about calling me many times. He never did. I thought about that for a while. All those months, he had been 40 minutes away from where my daughter-in-law was telling me they were, and he had never picked up the phone. All those times I called to check on my grandson and he was in the next room, and nobody said a word. I thought about the version of my son who was 10 years old in that oak tree. I thought about the version of him who stood at the front of a church and cried when Margaret died. I thought about all the versions in between. I don't know what I feel yet about my son. That's the honest answer. I think it's going to take a long time to sort through. What I know is that he made choices that cost me years of my life and most of my savings, and a grief that I wouldn't wish on anyone, and those choices have consequences. Whatever the courts decide, I have to let that process work. My daughter-in-law pleaded guilty to insurance fraud and wire fraud. My son's case is still working through the system. They are both facing serious time. My grandson came home with me. That is the part I come back to. He sleeps in the room that used to be my son's room. I put a new mattress in there and let him pick out whatever he wanted at the store. He chose a blue comforter with little satellites on it, which I thought was a fine choice. He has enrolled in the school 3 miles from my house. His teacher sent me a note after the first week, saying he was quiet but engaged, that he asked good questions. I take him to school every morning. I pick him up every afternoon. On Saturdays, we go to the farmer's market on the town square, and he gets a cinnamon roll and I get a coffee and we walk around and look at things. Last week, he found a book about the solar system at one of the tables and asked if I would buy it for him. It cost $4. I would have paid $400. In the evenings, sometimes I catch him looking at Margaret's photograph on the mantel. He was too young when she passed to remember her much, but he knows who she is. I've been telling him stories about her, how she used to sing off-key to the radio and didn't care who heard, how she made the best sweet potato pie in the county, how she could look at a person once and know, just know, whether they meant well or not. He listens to every word. I still have the oak tree in the front yard. It's big now, the kind of big that takes decades to happen. Last Sunday morning, he asked me if he could climb it. I said yes. Just be careful of that second branch on the left. It's not as solid as it looks. He went up it like he had always known it was his. He got high enough that I felt my heart rate go up a little. The way it does when you watch a child do something that is perfectly fine but still makes you hold your breath. He looked down at me from up there with this expression I can't fully describe, part pride, part relief, like he was testing whether the world would hold him up. It held him. I waved. He waved back. I stood there in the yard, and I thought about what $27,000 buys. In the original plan, the plan that was made without me and around me and at my expense, it was supposed to buy someone else a new life on a beach somewhere. It was supposed to disappear into an account in a country I've never visited, pay for plane tickets and new names, and a version of the future that had no room for me in it. Instead, it bought groceries for a year, and a pension stretched thin, and a lot of late nights sitting alone in a quiet house talking to a photograph. It bought a grief that wasn't real, attached to a loss that didn't happen, which I'm not sure is better or worse than the other kind. It bought something being taken from me that I can't fully name and can't fully get back. But here is the thing I keep coming back to. The thing I told my grandson when he asked me one night if I was sad. I told him I was okay. He looked at me the way children look at you when they know you're giving them the edited version, and he said, "Are you sure?" I looked at him sitting there on the couch, in my son's old room down the hall, in the house where I had lived for 35 years, in the town where I knew every road by feel. "I'm sure," I said, and I meant it. Some things that are broken cannot be fixed. Some trust, once gone, does not come back in the same shape it left in. I know that. I've known it since Margaret passed, and I knew it again the day Carl sent me that photograph from a parking lot in Tucson. The world does not owe you a clean story with everything restored to how it was. That's not how it works. But sometimes, if you are patient and careful and you don't let the fire in you burn you down before you've done what needs doing, sometimes the thing that was taken from you comes back in a different form, not the form you would have chosen, not without cost. My grandson is asleep down the hall right now. Tomorrow morning I'll make him eggs and toast, and we'll drive to school, and he'll look out the window the whole way, watching things go by. He has his grandmother's eyes, dark and sharp and curious. He notices everything. I didn't know that about him until 8 weeks ago. I should have known it for years. I still talk to Margaret at night. I tell her about him something new every time, something he said, or did, or noticed that she would have loved. Last night I told her about the solar system book, how he had read the whole thing in 2 days and informed me at breakfast that Saturn could float in water if you had a bathtub big enough. She would have gotten such a kick out of that. I can almost hear her laughing.